Why do kids these days seem so much more emotional and disruptive? What's going on with kids today? Let's break it down and let's bust the myth that kids today are out of control. It is true that more disruptive emotional behaviors may seem common, but the other side of that truth is that the intensity of those behaviors has actually decreased over time. There was a video I put out a few weeks ago talking about some wins to celebrate in 2024. And in that video, I explained that violent crime rates are down. Despite everything that you see on the news and your social media feeds, violent crime rates for both adults and children are way down. We are seeing some of the largest decreases in violent crime just in 1 year increments. We are seeing some of the largest 1 year decreases in violent crime that we've had since those numbers have been recorded. It's not that kids these days are worse behaved. It's that some of these behaviors are happening much more frequently because they are at a much lower, that would be the correct grammar, a much lower intensity. So maybe children these days are throwing more tantrums, but really statistically, they are harming each other less. Or maybe it is that they appear more disrespectful, but their drug use is actually down. In mental health, we measure three things to see if someone is improving. And those three things are the frequency, intensity, and time of behaviors. It's the acronym F.I.T, F-I-T, frequency, intensity, and time. What often happens is intensity will start to come down, but then frequency and time will start to go up. So the intensity of those disruptive behaviors will go from being violent towards others to then shouting and screaming and tantruming to then being disrespectful. It will show that decrease in intensity over time. But it may be that as it is decreasing in intensity, it becomes more frequent, and maybe it even lasts longer. But that shift is still improvement. As a society, we can use those same three things, frequency, intensity, and time, to see how kids are doing. And it is true that teachers these days are reporting much more emotional dysregulation amongst their students. We're also seeing a significant increase in school suspensions. But as far as violence towards each other and violence towards adults and even adults towards children, the violence there, all of those numbers are coming down. We're seeing a huge decrease in intensity. And as that intensity comes down, it is likely we will see more frequency and that those behaviors may last for longer periods of time. I say all that to say that kids today are actually getting better at managing their emotions overall, even if the challenges seem more frequent. There's a few reasons that they seem more frequent. One is that they are more frequent, that kids these days are more emotionally dysregulated more often. But it is also true that those difficulties in emotional regulation are not resulting in as large of behaviors, as much intensity as they have in the past. Another reason that we're seeing more frequency is that there's an increased awareness of emotions. It used to be in schools, it was just sit down, shut up, and do what I tell you to do. And now we understand that that's actually not the best way to work with kids, even though that dealing with kids who are emotionally dysregulated can be very frustrating at times. I'm not saying that it is not difficult at times to deal with children who are throwing tantrums and having this emotional dysregulation. But what I am saying is that we know that telling them to just sit down, shut up, and do what they're told to do is not the best way for their long-term mental health for them to be dealt with. So that increased awareness surrounding emotions and increased awareness of best practices is also leading to an increase in the frequency of emotional dysregulation, but still that decrease in intensity. And there's also better reporting. There are cameras everywhere. In schools, there are cameras everywhere. If there were cameras in as many places as there are now, as when you and I were kids, if there were as many cameras then as there are now, you and I would have been in just as much trouble as these kids today are getting in. It's just they're being caught more often. It wasn't that we didn't do the things that they're doing, just nobody heard about it. Nobody saw it on a camera. But now it's everywhere. And there are policies now that require certain things to be reported for good reason, because we're catching things at lower levels, at lower intensity, so that they don't lead to a greater intensity. That means that there is more reporting of disruptive behaviors because we're catching them quicker, getting those students, getting those kids the help that they need so that it doesn't turn into a greater intensity problem. So that better reporting and more often reporting is a great thing that is really helpful, but it can seem very overwhelming to hear that all of these numbers are going up and all this is happening in our schools and different sports teams that kids play on, or in different clubs, or wherever kids might be, that these things are happening so much more often. But it's because we're getting better at knowing the early warning signs so that we can keep things at a low intensity so that they don't grow larger. It's a sign of progress. This lower intensity but more frequent challenges means that we understand kids better and we're helping kids in real time. Do I believe that kids these days seem to struggle with their emotions more often? Yeah, I do. I believe that kids these days are struggling with emotions more often than kids in the past. But I also believe that they're struggling at a lower intensity and that we are quicker to see that a child needs help. We're quicker to get them connected to what they need, and we're doing a better job at keeping it at a lower intensity, even though it may be happening more frequently. Kids these days are not worse. They're just different, and different in some great and meaningful ways that show us we are really making progress. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it if you think it's time to celebrate the progress kids are making.